where you are. So far, you know how to play chords in every key, and you've learned how to string these chords into progressions by playing some of the best songs of modern times. So the next step is to understand exactly how progressions work so you can really master the art of harmony. What you will learn in this lesson. Here's a quick preview of what we'll cover in Lesson 7. You'll discover an unexpected link between the chords in a key so you can better visualize the movement in a progression. You will learn how each chord functions in a song so you know the best ways to arrange the different harmonies. You'll see how to dissect songs using harmonic heat maps to really understand their structures. You will also see how all 12 keys are symmetrical and totally interconnected, which informs your songwriting going forward. The genius of curiosity. In Lesson 6, we definitely covered a lot of ground. From the history of modern music and the birth of rock and roll, to the advent of the Beatles and the basic nature of songs, it's all been insightful, right? And maybe even a little inspiring. Since, after all, you got an inside look into the minds of some of the best songwriters ever, including John Lennon and Paul McCartney, who are by far the most successful popular musicians of all time. And indeed, by the end of the lesson, the focus was entirely on these two, where we got a special peek into the way they worked, picking apart the chords they used to write progressions to see past the myth of their magic and discover the true music theory at play. But while this dissection was a bit irreverent and even iconoclastic, the intent was only to debunk, not to debase. Because the art they produced is magnificent without question, with the power to put us all in a trance. I mean, there's a reason the Beatles are revered to this day, because they were exceptional masters of the craft. Yet, despite their celebrity, or the fame of any great artists for that matter, it's important to keep things in perspective, because you can get so bedazzled by someone's work that you might mistake the outputs for the inputs instead. And by that, what I mean is that a song, for example, the output, can be so amazing that you might assume its composition, the input, was equally grand, as if the act of songwriting is on par with the final product. It's a common misconception, really, that many people have, even subconsciously, without any explicit thought. Though in reality, the relationship between these things is disproportionate, where the results exceed the effort and the effect outscales the cause. You see? Which is why it can all seem like such magic, as the plain gives rise to the prodigious and the ordinary becomes extraordinary. So to make sense of this magnification, the inputs are often enlarged in the mind to the point that they equal the outputs once more. And as a result, this means that in music, the songwriting is thought to be just as big as the song itself, totally fantastic and worthy of awe. In fact, this fallacy of false equivalence is so pervasive that it extends to songwriters too, who are often admired for their association with music and seen as being larger than life as well. But now that you've learned a bit of theory, you know that the patterns are what really make it all possible, and that every brilliant musician is simply basking in the reflected glow of music, which is the real source of stardom. I mean, you can't really give full credit to a songwriter for the music they produce. In the same way you'd never say that a mathematician created an equation or that a photographer is responsible for the scene they snapped. In each case, the person is only an observer who shares what they happen to see, hear, or deduce. Do you get what I'm saying? Which is why celebrities in any field can become disillusioned as their acclaim gets misdirected, so that the light shines on them more than their subject, which is what really deserves the attention. Granted, it must feel good to be hailed as a genius, but if we're honest, really honest, then we have to be humble and admit that our advances are discoveries, not inventions. This is what Albert Einstein meant when he said, "I have no special talent. I am only passionately curious," because he knew that curiosity was the cause of his breakthroughs and the true wellspring of his so-called genius. Anyway, this is all to say that in music, excellence is totally achievable. And once you discover theory, you too can become a genius, because it's the science at the very foundation of the art. So with that in mind, let's follow our own curiosity deeper into the heart of music theory to see where it takes us. Because curiosity didn't kill the cat, as they say, but instead makes you a cool cat, and a super skilled one at that. The secret of songwriting. Ironically, the Beatles claimed to be ignorant of theory, saying things like, "It's just music," or "There's no method," or "We just picked it up." But clearly, that was all balderdash. Because what they meant to say, and did sometimes specify, is that none of them could read music notation, which is something different altogether, as we'll look at in later lessons. Though it's obvious that these guys knew what they were doing and were perpetual students of the game, as evidenced by the progressions they wrote, which improved with every song. You see, the Beatles didn't just rattle out tunes, they composed classics with an output so prolific and the quality so high that it's clear they had some extra insight. They knew the building blocks of music, of course, like all the notes, intervals, and chords, and they had plenty of practice playing with progressions from their years of extensive study. But based on the results, they definitely grasped something more as well, some special secret of songwriting. Though what exactly was it? How did they write such great music? Was there a method to the madness? What inspired them to arrange the chords as they did in various songs? And why do some progressions show up repeatedly in their catalog, like these patterns, for example, which were a common theme throughout? The answer, as it turns out, is simple. Somewhere along the way, in their 10,000 hours of study, Lennon and McCartney discovered a hidden truth about music, a phenomenon that guided their actions and inspired their work. And what they learned was this. They didn't really control the songwriting process. In fact, they didn't control it at all, and instead found that the best results come by letting the music itself lead the way. In other words, they learned to follow the patterns already present in music, to leverage the relationships at play between chords, and to use this knowledge to create art. Like all great musicians, the Beatles learned that while notes and chords are the basic building blocks of music, they aren't like the toys you find in a child's nursery, those lifeless wooden cubes devoid of energy. Instead, what they realized is that notes and chords are more like magnets, elements already charged with an intrinsic vitality and impelled by an audible force field that governs their attraction to one another. In fact, this point is so important that it's worth repeating because it informs how you can write great songs too. So I'll say it again. Notes and chords are the building blocks of music, it's true, since every chord is composed of these elements. But that doesn't mean that they're like dead wooden doodads, indifferent to how they're arranged, or just some inanimate objects that require you to impose order on their structure. Instead, notes and chords are more like magnets that exert their own influence on things. And as a result, music is an active participant in the songwriting process, a force that displays its own affinities that will lead you when you listen. So to show you what I mean, let's look a little further at this energy I'm describing to see how it operates so you can learn to use it yourself. The energy of intervals. Admittedly, all this talk about the force may sound a little strange, I know, like the stuff of some sci-fi story from a galaxy far, far away. But it's really how music works right here in our own world. So stick with me because this is going somewhere. As crazy as it might seem, music itself has something to say about the way it's composed. Not in words, mind you, or through any pronounced supernatural means, but in the way it naturally flows and unfolds. And once you understand the active role it plays, you have a major advantage as you learn to follow its innate patterns and propensities to write excellent songs. After all, that's what the Beatles did. When they composed music, they didn't just throw random chords together and then slap on a melody like so many amateurs do. Instead, they learned to leverage the inherent power of the patterns they played, all with an expert touch. You see, the genius of John, Paul, George, and Ringo was to simply trace the flow of energy already present in music, allowing it to guide their way, which is why their songs always sounded so good. And this energy is what you've seen in the patterns we've studied so far. It's the spark of life that animates the major scale, and the power that generates the circle of fifths, and the force that drives the structure of chord harmonies. Do you see what I mean? This energy is what electrifies music at all levels and is the metaphysical gravity we talked about before, which binds the notes into chords that become progressions that expand into songs which then pull us all into the same strong orbit. It's an energy that you can hear with your ears and feel in your bones, a power that permeates your very being and reverberates your soul. And now with color music, it's also something that you can see with your own eyes, because the colors expose this phenomenon right before you in plain sight. Of course, the colors reveal all 12 notes, that's a given, which is important because these pitches are what you actually play to make music. They are the content of sound itself, so it's critical that you can see every pitch. But what's even better is that you can see the intervals between these notes too. So the colors illuminate more than just the content of music, pitches, they also clarify their context in relation to each other, intervals. And this insight is really the key, because it's within these intervals that the energy of music resides. In other words, the space between the various notes and chords is truly what gives music its meaning, in the same way the vacuum of space between stars and planets creates context within the cosmos. Get it? It's all the same basic idea. Now, this concept is pretty abstract, I know, but it's essential to your mastery of music, so it's important to emphasize here. And it was the French composer Claude Debussy who said it best when he observed that music is the space between the notes, which sums it up so succinctly. What he meant is that the real essence of music lies not in the pitches themselves, but in the relationships between them. That is where this energy lives and gives sound all of its meaning. So the secret to songwriting is subtle, you see, and not what you might have expected. The trick isn't to focus on the notes per se, but to look at the intervals instead. And though this point is a paradigm shift, it's the perspective that leads to discovery. So with this insight, let's look more closely at intervals, and specifically at the intervals in chords, to see what kinds of patterns emerge that will guide us on our way. Intervals, chords, and emotion. In short, music is made in the intervals, in the empty space between the sounds, where the energy pulls like gravity on the individual notes and chords, attracting them together to form logical and pleasing patterns. And in Lesson 5, How to Build Chords, you saw this attraction at work, where the triads in a key are composed of tertian intervals in particular. You remember, right? All you have to do is play every other note in the major scale, and from this sequence, 7 distinct chords are made, like these in the key of G, for example, which are built from the intervals of a third. It's simple, really. And what's beautiful is how these intervals influence the way everything sounds, since these major and minor thirds determine the tone of each triad, where some sound happy and others feel sad, all based on the intervals within them. While the major chords sound strong and sunny, the minor chords seem weak and glum, which makes for an interesting group indeed, where the whole set serves as a dramatic palette in a way, or what you might call a menu of emotions. And with this array of options, you can tell any story you want, all through the use of harmony. In fact, this is basically what the Beatles did in every one of their songs, where they used different chords to convey the feelings they intended, crafting progressions that effectively move through a series of psychological states. Like this pattern from I Feel Fine, for example, which tells its own little tale using chords from the key of G. To hear it for yourself, let's play this progression on the guitar and listen to the change in tone from the major chords to the minor triads. From happy to sad and back again, there's definitely a difference. And to highlight this contrast, Lennon even played with the effect by singing the word glad with every B minor chord of the minor third, which gives the sentiment a bittersweet slant with an extra dose of nuance. I'm so glad that she's my little girl. She's so glad she's telling all the world. Get it? It's brilliant, really. So in this way, he used the power of chords to his advantage by playing off the emotions they stir to say more than he could with words alone, letting the music do much of the talking, as it were, or the singing, better said. But while this is a clever use of chords for sure, in the way he juxtaposed them, it still doesn't explain why this progression works in the first place, or why the chords in any song can flow so well in sequence. So let's look even closer at these chords at an even deeper level than before, past the intervals in each separate triad to the underlying link between them. Because this link reveals an unexpected pattern that informs the way songwriters compose progressions. The missing link, if you will, that helps it all make much more sense. The natural pattern of chords. Admittedly, what I just said might sound confusing. All this talk about looking past intervals to find some hidden link. So to clarify what I mean, let's retrace our last few steps to solidify what we've seen. And in the process, we'll also uncover this connection between chords, which really is amazing. So with that said, here's a recap of what we've covered. In every key, you can build 7 different triads, starting on each separate scale degree, and then combining every other note, like these chords in the key of G. And as a result of this alternating pattern, each harmony is imbued with its own quality, where some sound happy and others feel sad based on the intervals within them. But because they're all cut from the same cloth, as it were, they also sound compatible, which is why you can arrange them in a variety of ways and the result will always sound good. That much you already know, and with this knowledge you can craft some nice progressions. But if you want to write especially compelling songs, then you need some additional insight as well into how these chords are actually related in a key so you know how they interact. And this relationship, this connection or link, is found in the tertian intervals that build each triad, or better said, in this alternating pattern as a whole. To see what I mean, take another look at this pattern that's used to construct each harmony, and what you'll notice is that it actually forms a continuous chain that ties everything together into a string of major thirds and minor thirds, that is, that binds every other note of the major scale like this. In essence, this is the same pattern we've seen all along, but shown in a different way, where the sequence of alternating intervals is emphasized to highlight the natural connections between chords. And as you can see, this pattern flows like a current of electricity through the notes, binding them like magnets into chords, which then forms a chain that looks different from what you've seen before, where the resulting triads are laid out in a new order altogether, like this. Get it? The same 7 chords are formed, of course, nothing has changed there. Only now they've all been rearranged to follow the natural order of tertian intervals instead, which is cool, right? Because now you can clearly see how these chords are connected, and the pattern they form is beautiful. But what's even better is the way this sequence also cycles on forever when you wrap this pattern into a closed loop. Because with this perspective, you suddenly have an even more compact view of how all the harmonies relate in a key. The same chords are still present, of course, only now they've been rearranged yet again into this new and natural formation. For example, you can see the tonic chord 1 is still made of notes 1, 3, and 5, and that the minor second chord 2 includes notes 2, 4, and 6, and that the minor third, 3, is built from notes 3, 5, and 7, etc. Nothing is fundamentally different here except the way these patterns are depicted. But the advantage is that you now can see how these chords are connected as they move from one to the next. And when you look closely, you can see how these harmonies mix and intermingle to form their own special connections that inform why some chords sound especially good together, like chords 1, 4, and 5 in particular, which overlap to create their own little version of heaven in the form of a harmonic holy trinity. Get it? All of these bonds, with their strong sonic energy, are condensed into this single space, which you can use to compose great progressions, as we'll explore next. Though before you move on, be sure to complete quiz 1 of this lesson in the first few exercises to ensure you're really set to advance. Movement through harmonic space. You have to admit, it's pretty cool how the chords loop in a key, right? All connected in an endless ring of harmony. And now that you can actually see this pattern, you can start to build some good progressions, which is easy as you simply bounce from one chord to the next in this harmonic space, much like the ball in a pinball machine. You just start at the tonic chord 1 and then move between the various other chords before eventually returning to the tonic 1 once more. It's like a game, and just like the pinball, your path can change from one progression to the next to play out a virtually infinite number of possibilities. For example, try playing these 3 progressions starting on the one chord in each, depicted simply by its root, G, then move through the subsequent chords shown, depicted by their respective roots as well, as you listen to how each one sounds. Although they're all in the key of G, and they even use some of the same chords, each pattern is unique. Can you hear the differences between them? I should mention that by showing the chords in this way, where each triad is represented by its root note alone, we can streamline the illustration of harmony. So a basic 1-4-5 progression, for example, is simplified as the pattern here on the left, as opposed to its busier looking equivalent on the right. Interesting, right? Naturally, the path you take influences the sound of each progression. So the 1-6-2-5 feels different than, say, the 1-4-5 progression, since it follows an alternate course through the various harmonies, obviously. But the specific chords you use also help to shape the final effect. For example, did you notice how this first progression I played a moment ago passes through only the major chords 1, 4, and 5? Well, it did. And as a result, this pattern sounds especially happy, right? While in contrast, the second progression feels relatively sad with its added minor chords. And the third progression evokes a mix of emotions with its blend of harmonies, both major and minor. You see? It's really wonderful how it works. So the sound of each progression is based on the chords you play, and the chords you play are based on the path you take. And when you look closely, the path you take can actually move across two concentric rings, which sort the chords into groups of consonants and dissonants like this. It's totally elegant, actually. The more consonant, happy-sounding chords are situated within the inner ring, while the more dissonant, sad-sounding chords are placed around the perimeter. So by simply moving within or between these rings, you can travel through harmonic space with purpose and direction to influence the emotional impact of a song, just as all great songwriters do, it turns out, and like the Beatles did in particular. For example, take a look at the chord patterns in the song Love Me Do, and you'll see what Paul McCartney was up to. By staying entirely within the inner ring of consonant major chords, he gave this tune an especially bright and bubbly sound, just as he intended. In fact, once you see this, you really can't miss it. Again, we'll look later on at how song sections like these work, so you'll learn all about terms like intro, verse, bridge, etc., so stick with me. Since each section keeps to chords 1, 4, and 5, this song is positively dripping in happiness, or what you might call catchy and profitable consonants. Which is why so many other songs also stay within this inner ring, like nearly all the early hits of rock and roll, because it's such a safe and established zone. So any progression built from these chords almost can't let you down. But of course, if you want some more variety and feel adventurous, then it's also fun to reach into the outer ring as well, outside the core of consonants to the dissonant edges beyond. Because that's where some of the best action happens, it turns out, just as John Lennon found in the song I Feel Fine. To see what I mean, take a look at the chord patterns he used in this composition, and it's clear that he set a new course, off the beaten path into the more dissonant chords. Interesting, right? Of course, he still made heavy use of the major chords in most of the sections throughout. And then in the chorus, the song shifts to the outer ring of minor harmonies for more movement and sonic complexity. And the result is truly amazing, where the song lights up with incandescent energy, alive and aglow with motion and emotion. And really, this is how the Beatles advanced with each new song, by learning to navigate the space with agility, plotting their courses with greater skill so that each tune got better over time. In other words, they became pinball wizards, crack shots at the game of songwriting, which is one that you can now master as well. So in the next section, we'll explore the space even further to understand its structure more fully so that you can move with ease yourself. Now later on, we'll look at how songwriters incorporate even more chords into their progressions, including harmonies that extend beyond the 7 triads of a key, which is where music can get even more interesting and full of energy. But for now, we'll focus on the essential principles of chord progressions so you have a solid foundation moving forward.